Is Dragon Ball Z becoming overrated? No, but let's give it a little more thought because although it seems easy to give a direct answer, that's a loaded question. One that I don't think people give enough thought to when it is asked. I mean, for most things, as time passes, people will begin to question the work of art's place in history. And by this point, I think we can all agree that in stature and notoriety alone, Dragon Ball Z is legendary and its place in history in that sense cannot be questioned. But when I hear people's arguments as to why Dragon Ball Z is overrated, it is often based on the overall quality of the story that is Dragon Ball Z. That makes sense. To try and measure how good a story is based on how popular it is childish. If that were the case, then for the last decade and a half, the best movies to come out were the MCU movies, and I am a lifelong Marvel fan. That will never change. But I'd be lying if I said that some of these movies were even good movies, let alone the best. So how do we truly determine how good Dragon Ball Z is in detail? I think there are a couple of different ways to start. There are many categories to assess when determining how good a story is, so I'll start with character development. Although Dragon Ball Z is a shonen story which we know have the usual tropes, many of the standouts excel when it comes to character development, and I don't think Dragon Ball Z is any different. Now, people love to bring up Goku and how from start to finish he doesn't really change as a person, and yes, I agree. But does that mean Dragon Ball Z is lacking when it comes to character development? I don't think so. Especially when it is obvious that Goku wasn't meant to develop as a character that way. It's not like Toriyama wrote the story and made it clear that he was trying to have Goku go through these changes. Goku is a flat character in that way. But I'd go as far as to say that nearly every other character who has significant time in the story experienced some kind of character development. The two most obvious are Vegeta and Piccolo. Piccolo went from the child of a character who Goku had killed, whose literal purpose for a while was to kill Goku, but over time, not only does Piccolo become the main caretaker of his former enemy's son, but he also grows to make friends, take on characters who would try to harm the innocent, and even fusing with his other half who was good in every sense of the word. Piccolo did an entire 180 from when he was introduced. At Vegeta's introduction, I think it is safe to say that he was arrogant, did not care for anyone but himself, and had no problem committing evil acts if it served his end goal. But by the end of Dragon Ball Z, he's still arrogant. But he also started a family that he loves deeply and made one of the greatest sacrifices in the Dragon Ball franchise. His development was more gradual than Piccolo's. With each passing arc, Vegeta would do something that showed he was changing as a person, but there will always be those moments that will remind the audience that he's not totally on the other side of the line just yet. But during the Buu saga, Toriyama completes Vegeta's transformation to a good person. It is seen through his actions, but it is also blatantly stated within the story. Before Vegeta sacrifices his life against Majin Buu, he has this pretty depressing conversation with Piccolo and he asks him what will happen to him after he dies. And out of respect for Vegeta, Piccolo is 100% honest with him, telling Vegeta that he won't be given the same luxuries as when Goku died. Because of how evil he was during his life, Vegeta's soul would be purified and his memories would be erased. So in the eyes of the universe, before fighting Majin Buu, Vegeta was evil. But in the fight against Kid Buu, Dende asked Porunga to wish back all of those who were killed after Babidi came to Earth, excluding those that are evil. And I'm sure you know, Vegeta was brought back to life with this wish. There's also Gohan's development, which I think was the main overarching storyline through the Cell saga. But even characters like Tien, Yamcha, Future Trunks, and Krillin all changed drastically as characters, and Goku was the conduit for that change. Now, stories like Naruto and One Piece have creators who have publicly praised Akira Toriyama for his work with Dragon Ball multiple times, even though many people say that these stories are better. And one thing that both Naruto and One Piece handle very, very well is world building. For Naruto, I think it's amazing that the story does such a great job at developing each village and how they all have their own identities. There have even been what are essentially world wars over disputes between villages. If you've watched or read the whole story, then it is impossible to not know many of the characters outside of the Leaf Village. Of course, Konoha is the base of the series, but much of the story lies outside of those borders. And this is even more so the case for One Piece. Outside of maybe Avatar: The Last Airbender, I don't know about a series that has handled world building quite like One Piece. Every single stop Luffy makes, whether it is your run-of-the-mill island, or a prison, or naval base, or even a kingdom made of sweets, you are going to get some next level world building. We're going to be introduced to a bunch of new characters and backstories for why they act that way. There's going to be some type of conflict that helps move Luffy forward, and then about half of the time, Luffy and his crew learn that a specific location is crucial to the makeup of the entire world. Does Dragon Ball Z go that far? No, but it wasn't bad either. Imagine telling the people who read Dragon Ball back in the 1980s that by the end of the story, Goku would not only go to space, but that he'd escape an exploding planet, become friends with the god of the universe, and spend more time in the story dead than alive. That person will look at you like you're crazy. But that just goes to show how good Dragon Ball Z is when it comes to world building, because none of that really seems out of place, even though it is so far out of the original scope that Dragon Ball started with. Is it to the same level as One Piece, where literally the entire globe is explored deeply? No. It isn't even Naruto, where villages and their histories are explored in depth. But Dragon Ball was a blueprint for both of those stories, and they wouldn't exist without it. We're not going to have the animation conversation because it isn't fair. Dragon Ball Z was great for its time. Of course, technology and methods have gotten better, so the animation as a whole is of a higher quality more often in the modern era, but that actually brings me to an important point in this whole conversation. I don't think it is fair to compare most things across eras, especially when the capabilities of the artists, writers, and animation studios have drastically changed. To properly compare anything, you need a common frame of reference, and not having one leads to people saying that one entire series is better than another one, when instead, I think it makes more sense to say that you just like one series more than the other. Of course, there are smart comparisons, and then there are just flat out dumb ones. I don't think that comparing Dragon Ball Z and Fairy Tail makes as much sense in an overrated conversation, because Dragon Ball Z was the #1 shonen of its era. Fairy Tail never was. Fairy Tail wasn't even top 3. There is a set of 3 stories that people acknowledge as the dominant stories in the generation after Dragon Ball. But comparing Attack on Titan and Dragon Ball makes a little more sense. Although I wouldn't have an overrated conversation because they are so different in subject matter and tone, both series are perceived by many to be the best of their time. So we have world building, character development, animation, filler. I could go on and on about the differences between Dragon Ball Z and newer stories and why they should not be used as parameters for a fair comparison. But one thing that does not change, no matter how much time passes, is emotion. I'm not a philosopher, I'm not a scientist, but since the beginning of time, the human race's range for emotions has not changed, at least I don't think so. People now aren't getting more angry than they did in the 1980s, that's just not how it works. I bring this up because a long time ago, I'm not sure exactly which video it was, I said that I don't really get invested into a story until it invokes some kind of emotional reaction out of me. It can be anger, joy, sadness, it doesn't matter. And I think we'd all be lying if we said that Dragon Ball Z didn't have some top tier emotional moments. Piccolo's sacrifice for Gohan was super sad, Goku's sacrifice for the Earth, Vegeta dying to Frieza, Vegeta's sacrifice for the Earth. But a lot of times when people speak about emotional moments for shonen, it's always about sadness. But that ain't the only emotion. What about the shock that came from Perfect Cell coming back to Earth? Or the disappointment that came after seeing Chaozu and Tien fail against Nappa? Or Vegeta and Trunks failing against Cell? What about the confusion that came from seeing Goku not only give up against Cell, but to also give him a sensu bean? And then my personal favorite moment in Dragon Ball Z, experiencing the joy and satisfaction from seeing Goku build the Spirit Bomb against Kid Buu. These are all emotional moments too. We as a community can acknowledge that Dragon Ball Z has its place in history without diminishing it when comparing it to other great stories, which is something my generation does far too often. We act as if two great stories can't coexist. I think that saying Dragon Ball Z is the best is wrong, but to say it is overrated simply because other good stories have come out since then doesn't make sense. Maybe you could say that for Dragon Ball Super, since a lot of Dragon Ball Super's attention was built upon the massive legacy that the original run of Dragon Ball left, because in its era, Dragon Ball Super did get far more attention than many other stories that were better in many aspects, but that just isn't the case for Dragon Ball Z. I'm gonna do one of these for One Piece soon, so be on the lookout for that. But with that being said, this is BigTune, and thanks for watching. Hell of a good one.